latest development comes as the threat of Donald Trump's 25% tariff on all Canadian imports looms large, with the deadline for that just a week away. Yesterday, Trump insisted those tariffs were, quote, on time and on schedule. Canadian officials are, though, continuing to lobby and push back against their application. Transport and Internal Trade Minister Anita Anand is in Washington today, for example, where she met, as you can see there, with her counterpart, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. Minister Anand is with us live now from D.C. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, Vashi. Great to see you, too.
You're just out of that meeting with your counterpart, Secretary Sean Duffy. Our listeners, as I'm sure you are well aware, are viewers of sort of the acrimony and antagonism between Canada and the U.S. right now. What can you tell us about the tone and tenor of that meeting against the backdrop of all that's going on?
We had a very positive exchange, very positive meeting. We agreed to work together to continue to build resilient supply chains cross-border across many areas of transportation. Aviation in particular was a very central topic to our conversation, and we agreed to continue to keep lines of communication open so that we can work together collaboratively.
When you talk about resilient supply chains, that sounds like the opposite of what Donald Trump is threatening to do, for example, with these tariffs and other measures that he's threatened us with. Do you have a different impression, like based on this conversation? Do you have the impression that, the person that you met with, Secretary Duffy, for example, is not in favor of breaking down the relationship?
Not at all. We both agreed that through these choppy waters and potential 25% tariffs being imposed, that we would continue to work together, that people and businesses on either side of the border depend on resilient supply chains in the transportation area. And again, we agreed to continue to communicate. We have been communicating, especially during the investigation of the Delta Air incident, and we'll continue to do that. I invited him to come to Canada, and that is something we are looking at in the future.
Is it possible to maintain resilient supply chains if there are 25% tariffs on everything we send to the United States and then the counter tariffs that are applied? Like, isn't that the opposite of a resilient supply chain?
We need to keep lines of communication open. We need to continue to impress upon our U.S. counterparts how impactful the 25% tariffs would be on either side of the border. And in fact, I stressed the disproportionate impact of U.S. protectionism and 25% tariffs during our meeting. And again, the importance of representing our country's positions was front and center during our meeting, but we agreed to continue to keep talking. And above all, producers and suppliers on either side of the border depend upon a trucking industry, an aviation industry, a shipping industry that functions well. And that is where transportation ministers and certainly Secretary Duffy himself see the importance of cooperation being important.
Do you have the impression after that meeting that he understands the stakes as you laid them out just now?
The importance, again, of resilient supply chains, of robust supply chains, of building back, certainly post-COVID, and in this particular environment, as the leaders of our countries negotiate the potential 25% tariffs, is not lost on either of us. But our obligation is to continue that dialogue. Our obligation is to represent our respective stakeholders in that dialogue. And what I found in Secretary Duffy is a willing collaborator who will come to the table and have that conversation. This is not going to be our last conversation, but it was certainly a very important first face-to-face meeting.
Do you have a sense of whether we should be taking the president at his word yesterday that those tariffs are on time and on schedule? I know this isn't the only meeting that you've had while you're in Washington. Like, do you think that that is the case?
What I know is the case is that our government will be ready to respond with retaliatory counter tariffs if and when those protectionist measures come forward from the United States. All we can do from a Canadian standpoint is to be ready, is to represent businesses and labor and Canadians at large in order to protect our economy, in order to diversify our supply chains, and in order to reduce internal trade barriers, as I'm trying to do, in order to deliver up to $200 billion to the Canadian economy, which would offset any particular potential protectionist measure from the United States without even going through Donald Trump.
Yeah, it could certainly potentially help offset that in the medium to long term. But I think there's a whole country that's kind of on edge right now, wondering if next week our economy is going to almost instantly be sent into a recession. And I take the point that, you know, the federal government and other governments are there making the case. I'm just unclear if anyone has responded to you saying that case is being heard. Like, and if you're not answering, does that mean that likely it's not?
I am answering. I'm giving you the exact content of our conversation, which is I indicated the importance and the potential negative impact of tariffs and counter tariffs to the economies of both countries, certainly the United States, given their wholly dependence on Canadian electricity, for example. I also, secondly, mentioned the importance of maintaining an integrated, resilient supply chain in the transportation sector. And then thirdly, ensured that he understood that Canada will continue to diversify our supply chains so that we support Canadian businesses and Canadian labor at the same time.
And Minister, like I said, I understand that, and I understand that that's what the job of the federal government and other governments are. I'm just asking on behalf of anxious Canadians whether you're getting any assurances that there's a way out of what Donald Trump said yesterday is coming next week.
Listen, the information that we are receiving from the White House does change frequently. What our job is as a Canadian government is to remain steady at the wheel, to represent and protect Canadian interests. And while I'm in my meetings here in Washington, that's exactly what I am doing and will continue to do on behalf of Canadians. And I will reiterate the importance of diversifying our own supply chains so we're less reliant on the U.S. economy and eliminating barriers to trade so that we can deliver up to $200 billion to the Canadian economy without even going through Donald Trump.
Your initial post also mentioned flight safety. And I just wanted to ask you, in light of, you mentioned Delta. Today there was another kind of near miss in Chicago, the video of which is really kind of going through, you know, you can very easily access. There is some speculation in the United States, some reporting around cuts, for example, at the FAA or of other oversight mechanisms. And I'm wondering if you have a view one way or the other as our transport minister about whether or not there is any linkage there.
I do not see a linkage, but I will say there was a member of the FAA at our meeting so that I could stress the importance of air safety writ large, and certainly Secretary Duffy was in agreement. We agreed to take any lessons from the investigations of these air incidents back to our respective portfolios to ensure that we are doing whatever we can, respectively, to ensure the further air safety of our respective airspaces. This is indeed a relationship where we are contributing to investigations on both sides of the border, and we agreed to continue to work together and to meet frequently. That interim report from the Delta investigation will be available within 30 days of the crash. That's the time period set down in the international aviation rules, and certainly as minister, I will take that report very seriously and certainly hear back from the independent and monitor that I've had to observe that investigation as well.
And I know your time's limited. Just very quickly, it's not within your portfolio, but did the Five Eyes reporting come up at all today in any of your conversations? Did anyone talk to you about this idea that Peter Navarro wants to ensure Trump tries to kick Canada out of the Five Eyes alliance?
No, it did not come up in my discussions with Secretary Duffy at all. As I mentioned, we focused primarily on robust supply chains. We focused on ensuring that we meet frequently and have open lines of communication. We agreed to meet shortly to discuss ports and port security, and we agreed to continue to collaborate. And as I said, in this time, what Canada needs is a steady hand at the wheel representing Canadian interests on tariffs, on transportation, on robust supply chains, and the Canadian economy. And that's exactly what I did today, Vashi.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate you making time this evening for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
Thank you. You too. That's Transport Minister Anita Anand live from Washington, D.C.